So
Yeah,
you can go ahead and start and control the meeting, Mark.
yeah.
I'll just turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Share screen. Share the screen. Here we go. And I'll minimize this. Go right into this. Oops, let me go back up. Sorry about that. Okay, so welcome, Doctors Farabee, Pam Gord, and Dr. Talaferro. Welcome. I'm Mark Rodriguez, and I'll be doing a oral presentation defense for my dissertation in the title Value-Based Knowledge Management Framework, a quantitative study for standardizing a KMF. In the introduction of this, the problem of measuring KM and supporting it with a value-based KM framework is the overall basis for the dissertation. The Knowledge Management Institute provided a report that discussed one particular framework, and that particular framework consisted of very simple, it was after action reports and also community of practices. Those were two intensive activities that they called knowledge gathering through community of practices and after action reports, which involved a lot of collaboration throughout a timeline of their organizational management. And then also mixed with that is with the framework that I'm going to discuss in the dissertation, which I did discuss, was an organizational business governance process or framework by Hickman in 2015, a leadership book, how to design a framework for organizational governance. The APQC in 2019 provided findings on organizations that need to support KM value. It was evident in the findings of that 9% of the KM budgets were decreased over that year, the previous year of 2019, and leading up to it, and 18% of the KM practitioners that were part of the study had no KM budgets at all. And that was roughly around 400 sample size that they looked at. And just as a quick note, there's a footnote down here. The APQC is the world's foremost authority on benchmarking best practices. And that's why I chose them. And the KMI group is one of those groups that teaches in KM globally. And they're very also pretty well known. The urgency of need is due to increasing digital security and safety risk, and also the loss of optimal organizational performance. That's why there's a need for this, and it's an ever-growing practice, knowledge management. So the key to this study was to assess characteristics against the total KM value. And I get into the sub-bullet here that the characteristics are annual revenue, market capitalization, KM annual budget, KM employee costs. And that KM employee cost is a makeup of the contractor and the KM staff. And that was designed, when I asked the question in the survey, was an annual base figure, as well as the annual budget of the KM budget. And also the other factors are employee population and the organizational type and what type of KM support was used and if a KM strategy was used. Next, the problem statement slide. So the problem is that there is a need to investigate the difficulty in obtaining adequate KM program funding for many organizations and to investigate the general lack of literature to conduct an appropriate KM framework, of which framework can be used to stand up a KM program during its developmental stage of a program lifecycle, other than simply prescribed using existing resources. The investigation of an appropriate KM framework consists of applying the theory of systems thinking as a construct for long-term planning, which can also support acquiring resources to sustain the KM framework. The impact of inadequately funding and not having an appropriate standardized KM framework leads to deficiencies in an organization's capacity to capture and manage knowledge, and organizations risk missing opportunities that would otherwise optimize their organization's performance. In this purpose slide here, also included with the method and design, population, and sample size, we'll start with the purpose statement. The purpose of this quantitative correlational study is to investigate correlational relationships among a sampled KM group's organizational characteristics and their respective total KM program value, and relate it to a theory of systems thinking within a standardized KM framework. Method and design. Quantitative methodology was used with a correlational study design, the populations and sample size. The population for this study was 6,150 members selected through the LinkedIn KM group, sponsored by the KM Management Institute, nonetheless. And the sample size, based off of the calculation of 5% margin of error, was at least 362 participants with a 95% confidence interval was used in the calculation. The sample size and demographics, I didn't, through the IRB, didn't ask permission to actually gather precise identification so that to make it easier, but just based off an observation as I was getting the acceptance of requests for being participants, I observed that there was a 40 to 60% ratio of male to females, and the range of their ages were anywhere from 33 to about 60 years old. So it was a pretty mature group of people, and you know, based off of some of the a lot of their profiles, they were well into their careers as senior managers in their companies and organizations. Okay, and 82.56% of those participants were mostly out of the United States. That 362 sample size. The world map there on the right-hand side, the lighter portions indicate all the regions from which the participants participated from. My research question: what was the relationship among the various organizational characteristics and the organization's total KM value? The variables included the organizational characteristics were as follows: 1 through 6, organizational type, whether it's MPO or FPO, employee population, annual revenue, market capitalization, type of KM support used, KM strategy used or not used, and all that against the variable of total KM value. And there's a little sub-bullet here on the total KM value, which I discussed before, the makeup of the two big annual budget for KM and also the staff costs on an annual basis. My hypothesis, 1 through 6, there was a total of 6, and they were all measured for significant relationships against total KM value. First, H1 was employee population, H2 was annual revenue, H3 was market capitalization, H4 was KM strategy used or not used, H5 was the type of organization, MPO or FPO, and H6 was the type of support used. The theoretical framework of this, as I mentioned before, was Sinjay's theory of systems thinking. There's been other literatures written on the theory of systems thinking. Sinjay uses it a little bit differently, and I'll get to that in a second here. But so it was used for the framing of this studies for a proposed KM framework. Integrating the KM framework with an overall organizational business governance model includes all leaders at all levels. For supporting coalition when there's a requirement for sustaining funding for organizations' KM program. So that's why that is very important to include those stakeholders. It also allows for long-term planning. So with that being said, on this last bullet here, I did mention long-term planning, and it does require more collaboration, but it gives people a holistic view because you can see some of the other impacting things that could happen to other parts of the organization when decisions are made or funding is allocated appropriately or not appropriately. Okay, literature synopsis. So the literature was aimed at sort of the model of really 2012 literature that he wrote, where that literature review should be done to search for as many written pieces of literature related to the topic. So that was the approach. Historical overview from my germane literature of thought leaders. One of the main original ones, if you will, was Peters in 2001, who discussed a definition of KM actually required politics for knowledge transfer in a more relaxed setting, like perhaps a dinner with some wine. And that was actually verbatim in his review of his literature and his definition. And Raleigh in 2003 discussed the field of librarianship as the beginning formation of KM in a tiered level, where it started with historians and it led up to gatekeepers or librarians, as we know, and that what is now termed the KM of the present term. Serban and Lewin in 2002 mentioned that in general, the term was actually codified by corporations as a practice in the 90s. Sinjay, 2006, he discussed in his book disciplines which were developed unilaterally, all to support this other higher level theory of a learning organization, which is a theory also discussed in other literatures by many other authors. But the difference with Sinjay is that he included these disciplines. The first one was systems thinking, and also another theory discussed in many other pieces of literature, personal mastery, mental models, building shared vision, and learning team. These were the disciplines of Sinjay's awesome book. I think is phenomenal. Rathi and others in 2014 discussed an interorganizational partnership with other organizations that were NPO to share knowledge across each other to save money, return on investment, particularly because NPOs typically do not make enough money to stand up a full operational knowledge management practice. Sharma in 2007 suggested an approach within their study with value-added measures in a KM framework for financial performance and an organizational mix with an organizational KM strategy. And current literature was also one of the things that I had a review in, and much of the current literature discuss some value variables, different variables, and then other practices such as Lean and Six Sigma, which are improvement methodologies. And Lean and Six Sigma is one of the qualifications that I hold as a black belt. So that was very interesting to me. And more on the literature review. Next we have here on slide 11 the theoretical framework literature by Mahmoud and Yusuf in 2012. They mentioned the learning organization, and that directly ties to the systems thinking that I introduced with Sinjay's book, and Abdullah and others in 2013 continued their discussion to increase the scope of the theory of learning, and as it relates to financial outcomes in NPOs, not profit organizations. And down in the last bullet, Veltri and Bronzetti in 2015 conducted a mixed methods study. And their data collection was to answer hypothesis tests, and assemble findings to answer research questions. The Kong 2015 described using a qualitative exploratory method, which incorporated semi-structured interviews. The analysis used was a thematic and systematic review of documents and websites, along with interview questions. So that was in order for him, or probably her, I'm not sure, but to triangulate evidence findings. Excuse me. The next slide, I discussed the research design literature, and there was various works from Chandra in 2019, who conducted a meta-analysis, and also Dahri and others in 2019 conducted a cross-sectional design with random sampling of 129 branch managers from banks, multi-banks, and that was a very interesting article through a questionnaire that they did. And the last of the research design was supporting chapter 5, was to find literature in specific alignment with the hypothesis questions. Instrumentation and data collection approach. Instrumentation I used Question Pro 2019 because it was advertised by one of the classes at University of Phoenix. It was great. I really liked it. It has a built-in auto data collection mechanism, and the company actually works with you to kind of modify the actual what the software does, because it was real crucial to have, according to my IRB, to have the particular informed consent show up when they either accept it or not accept it, to move forward. And then something happened after that if they didn't want to go forward with the consent, informed consent, they would exit or continue. So that was very crucial. I couldn't have done it without this group. I don't think there's too many groups out there like that as far as companies for surveys, but I might be wrong. I haven't looked at many others, but there is the website here in the second bullet. And also in Appendix C, you can see that there is a survey, a questionnaire kind of thing. So, and the reliability and validity of the survey depended on how the questions were written in the survey and how the quality of the survey tool tested with the piloting of the survey. Data collection approach. So I started the process with recruiting participants via posting first. Then I had to move over. That didn't have too much impact. And the leadership of KMI surprised me and didn't assist me in that posting. So when I posted it, very few people really saw it. When you post it yourself and you're not the leader, I realized later on that you have to kind of make them, you have to send it individually or make them your friend, and they would see it if you did post it. So it was a learning process, and now I know. So definitely something to pass on to my other colleagues in the community of practice. The survey responses were collected automatically. When it got to 362 completed surveys, the numbers were always tallied, but when it got to 362, that's when I started my gathering of the data and working with the data. It does identify when other surveys are done. So I think there was like 700 plus surveys that were total incomplete. So those could be used. So that was also another nice feature of this software. The data analysis approach was using the nominal logistics regression model with the statistical software Minitab. All the factors were tested against the response variable total KM value. And of course, here are the factors again, 1 through 6, the strategy, use or not use, what type of organization, what kind of staffing, employee population, annual revenue, and market capitalization. The p-value threshold, as usual, the 0.05 was used to determine the statistical significant relationship. And then that was assessed against the null hypothesis. And now we get into the findings. So based off my analysis from the review table 5 through 7 in the dissertation, where the nominal logistics regression tests denoted there were 6 total hypotheses that can be answered, right, with a 95% confidence interval for the for-profit and non-for-profit. In all 3 of those logic table tests, they all had a significant relationship. Total employee population was significant in at least 1 of 3 of those tests, logic table tests, and total annual revenue was significant in 2 of 3. And strat or no strat, meaning no strategy or using a strategy, was significant at least 1 logic test of 3. And the KM support was significant in 2 of 3 of those logic tests. The only term that was not significant in any of the 3 tests was the market capitalization factor. And that correlates to hypothesis tests H3. So H1 was the employee population, and that we did accept the no, we rejected the no, the no was rejected, not we, but I did. The no was rejected for that one because there was a statistical significant relationship. Same thing with number 2, and that was the organization's annual revenue against total KM value. And then we get into H3, which was the null hypothesis was actually accepted, that there wasn't relationship that was significant, and that was the market capitalization. And then the rest, 4 through 6, were actually rejected. And 4 was the KM strategy or not, or use of KM strategy or not used against the total KM value. And 5 was the type of organization, either MPO or FPO. And 6 was the type of KM support for the organization against the total KM value. And that was also rejected. Recommendations for leadership. So I highlight the importance of how to establish an organizational infrastructure such that it prioritizes strategic thinking in a systems thinking approach that includes the practice of KM and how the senior leadership prioritizes funding for KM. The total capital investment was not considered a significant term or predictor to the total KM value, which indicates a non-correlation. This factor may be left out of a standardized KM framework as opposed to the other factors when developing measures for a KM framework. All the other factors here on the last bullet is where I'm at. They did show a significant relationship that existed between the total KM value. Those factors, as I mentioned before, were the for-profit type of organization or not-for-profit, the employee population, total annual revenue, strategy used or not used, and KM support, which can all be considered for measuring the performance of a standardized value-based KM framework to drive value proposals for adequate funding within a long-term perspective planning KM framework. Recommendations for future projects. Based on the literature review and this study, which focus on the KM framework, a future project could consist of investigating a performance dashboard for KM measures to assess the usefulness of knowledge. There was some discussion in some of the little bit of the literature that did discuss this to some extent, but it wasn't quite applicable across all areas. And it would have to be something that could be tailored. And that would also be recommended. My next recommendation for future projects is to consider using a KM World Conference and partner with them to do some studies that would actually, when you have that many people at a conference, whether it's in person or virtual, the dissemination of a questionnaire or survey could be relatively expedited if you have that many people in the focus area. In my conclusion, the purpose of this correlation investigation was accomplished using the nominal logistics regression test in Minitab to analyze certain organizational factors against the total KM value for alignment to the CNJ's systems thinking theory and value-based knowledge management framework. The objectives to investigate the correlational relationships were accomplished, and the research question was answered with quantitative results. What continues to reflect not only in the study, but in research literature is that the growth of knowledge management is continually occurring across the globe, and it persists. The results of this study provided a fundamental fact that 5 of the 6 selected organizational characteristics tested as having a statistical significant relationship with total KM value. A total market capitalization did not. One may deduce that total market capitalization is a high differentiating or missing factor across most sampled organizations. The scholar practitioner leader model from the University of Phoenix was applied as a process throughout the whole journey leading up to completion of the dissertation, which can be carried out as a lifetime learner. So, and here are my references here. Okay. Okay.
Great, Mark. Well, I'm going to go around and I'll start with Dr. Gordon asking questions.
Okay.
Mark, that was beautifully presented. You did a very nice study. I'm very impressed. I do have 2 questions for you. Why did you use the 0.05 p-value?
Oh, that was I believe, well, I mean, it's a standard recognized in many of the literature. Also, Mr. Field in 2013 used it redundantly. I mean, that is sort of the norm.
I always ask that question when it's a quantitative study
I
because
thought it was a
you'd be
trick question.
surprised. No, not a trick question. You'd be
Okay.
surprised how many people don't know that, you know, in social science, it is the standard.
Right.
Hindsight is 2020. So tell me what you would do differently if you had to redo this study.
In the future, in the recommendations or in future studies, I would do it in a more where I could capture the audience a lot faster with their with the information as far as the survey collections and all that. It was really painful. People obviously don't like to do surveys, so that took a long time, and individual sending out of messages, that was a very lengthy in my time. And and I think I don't know if the pandemic had something to do with it or what. People were freaking out or something, but yeah, that took a long time. That would be one thing that I would do differently, is maybe go to a world conference. And I thought about it, but it would be something that I would have to do way ahead of time and coordinate with the people that are going to set up a conference.
Okay, thank you. Those are the
Yep.
questions I have.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gordon.
Dr. Talia Farrow, I hope I say your name right.
That's okay. Most people don't know how to pronounce it anyway.
I know they can't say my name either, so I understand.
Mark, you did a really, really nice job. That was an excellent presentation, and I think you understand your study quite well. When we first started reading in 742, you had a very low reliability score for your instrument. When you received that message from me, what did you do?
Well, I had already had the data gathered, and I had already scrubbed it, and because I had actually considered, when I first saw the 0.45, I thought, oh my gosh, to be honest, I didn't even really look at that until I had all the data, because it was just coming in, and so I had relied on checking the validity by the responses by the people that I initially queried, and I hadn't actually done the data analysis to identify whether the Cronbach Alpha was good enough or not until I got Minitab installed in my computer. That's a very expensive program, and my command, or where I work at, they put it on my laptop, and so then I used it, and I thought, but by that time I had all the data, and I had already analyzed the whole data. That's why I turned it around to you so fast. And you had asked, I said, oh yeah. So here you go. You said, give me all the data, Mark. What does it look like then? And so that was a lifesaver that I had that program already and all the information. And I don't know if you noticed, but I was really close. I was at 0.74 for the second time when I got all the data together. That was a blessing in disguise. So I felt very blessed. I was being protected or something. I don't know. It was weird. That was strange.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that wouldn't have held you up on completing your dissertation. What we really want you to learn is the process.
Yeah.
And not so tied to the outcome. While we always look for, those issues, we want to make sure that you understand the process. So, not thinking about the findings right now, what did you learn about yourself as a researcher?
Interestingly enough, I mean, the more I did it, the more I liked it, and collaborating with the people that write the software, I was actually having to use their knowledge, and they kept saying, well, now you're getting into, you need more consulting, and that's like $10,000 for so much time. And I'm just, oh, okay, then never mind. I just wanted to know how the software works. But along that process, I learned a lot. I'm learning about this so what I learned about myself is that I need to continue educating myself in statistical matters and learning that. So that was interesting. That was interesting.
Well, if you continue research, you will learn something new with every study you do, because this is just a beginning of the understanding of the research process. And so, every study will provide you with that with new knowledge and stuff. I have one more question. Because this was a pretty intensive understanding of the KM information, the network and the framework, if someone said to you, and I'm kind of asking you about an elevator speech, 1 minute, somebody stops in the elevator and says, "Hey, Mark, I heard you did this study. Tell me about it." Yeah. Well, they don't want to hear 5, 10, 15 minutes of it. They want to hear one quick and dirty minute. So what would you say?
Well, I would say this study that I did was based off my strategy management occupation, where I learned that where we focus at my command and we drive it from strategy management, the idea that we have incorporated what's called the theory of learning organization. And as I started to learn more about that, I identified something that really I homed in on that was key, was one of the disciplines that Sinjay wrote about, which was the theory of systems thinking. That was one of the disciplines. And I really homed in on that. And I kind of tied that in with my work of knowledge management. And I knew that we needed to stand up knowledge management, and leadership was not supporting it financially. And I looked around at some of the other areas like APQC, and saw that report that it is a common problem and funding these areas. So I thought that was an excellent dissertation, and I selected that to dive a little bit deeper and tying it with theory of systems thinking, because it applied to my work, and I couldn't think of a better topic for me. It applied to my work, and I thought that was perfect. And the educational process was also key to that.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Mark, I thought you did an excellent job. I was really pleased with that. What was your most unexpected result from the study?
Honestly, I wasn't sure if any of those were kind of show correlation. As I was doing different models and talking to the software people, I was actually surprised when we got to nominal logistics regression. I was actually very surprised, and they said, "Hey, this one works well with your data," and I started using it, and I was very happy. I didn't understand it. It's very complex, actually, when you have to identify, well, this logic table it did 4 different tests each time, and in this section you could see where 1 or 2 of the tests were applicable as far as they were showing statistical significance. And then in other logic tables otherwise and stuff. But I was actually surprised that overall it all kind of came together. That was very nice, and it just goes to show that you got to stick to the process, and you will actually be able to explain it. If you stick to a process, you can at least go back and say, okay, where did it go wrong, and improve from there. But yeah, I was very surprised.
So the actual analysis process was unexpected for you. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So have you thought about your plans to publish or disseminate this knowledge?
Actually, I will definitely try to. I'm going to use the University of Phoenix's a method. There's, I believe I have it in my dissertation still. It should still be in there, but they have a process that you go through.
The dissertation to publication.
Yes, and also the gentleman from KMI, the leadership person from KMI, has also said he would like to publish it as well.
Oh, awesome. That's excellent.
Everybody in not everyone, but a few people in that KMI group wanted to see the results of it. So they were very interested.
That's exciting.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Well, those were my only 2 questions.
Okay.
I feel like we're in pretty much agreement that Mark's done an excellent job. What do you think?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if we have to go off in secret and talk about it, but we can if you want to. But I just think we have pretty much agreement between us that Mark's done an excellent job. So
yeah, I don't have any problems with him moving forward.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
I definitely say a full pass.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank y'all. I am very humbled. Thank you so much. This was a humbling experience.
Oh, you did a great job.
No, you did a really good job.
Thank you.
We had a great team, so I really
Yeah, I
enjoyed
did. I had a great team all the way through.
Yeah.
I would recommend it for anyone. This is just great, wonderful.
Great. Okay, well,
All
what are you
right.
gonna do to celebrate?
I think I'm gonna take my wife and my children out to eat somewhere. That's what we do. We do family dinners,
Yeah,
in a safe
perfect.
way, obviously. So we got to wear masks and all that. But yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Just to get in, then you can take it off.
Yes,
You're
ma'am.
right.
Yep. Yeah, you know the drill. Yeah. So, but
Okay.
yeah, it is really neat. Now I'm a doctor. Gosh,
I know.
that is a big deal for.
It's funny because it lasts so long and you think there's no way you're ever gonna get there. And then all of a sudden one day. It's
Yeah,
just
it's
done.
interesting. Funny you say that because I'm getting close, and all of a sudden you all are saying submit to TK20 and come on, let's get ready for your defense. And I'm just going, is this for real? So yeah, it was. I think I mentioned to someone that it felt kind of surreal. I think Dr. Talaferro or someone.
So now you do need to have your full dissertation in TK20 and your oral defense slides.
Yes, ma'am.
And then let us know when they're there because nobody tells, I mean, we don't get alerted or anything.
Okay, we'll do.
Be nice.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you will need, after we approve it in TK20, then you need to send your dissertation to Dissertation Services. And then they will send the signature page.
Okay.
And you recorded this, I hope. Yes, you
Yes,
did.
I
I
did.
see it's recording. And you need to just post the recording into the classroom.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll do.
So those are the last final things you need to do.
Yes, ma'am.
You might want to turn your recording off. So
Oh,
it
yeah.
doesn't keep recording forever.
Yeah.
I know.
So what? Okay. So where's the recording button? I think it says stop share. Is that it?
I think you do have to
No.
turn the recording off.
Oh, here it is.
Like end recording or something.
Where it says record.
Oh, here it is.